Congressman Allred, thank you so much. Appreciate it. You're not in a primary, essentially. You don't have an opponent, but the general election is just around the corner. So what is your message to your voters, your supporters?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jack. It's been a really crazy first year in Congress, and it's been an honor to serve this community where I was born and raised. And I think that I've tried to stay focused on the issues that I think matter most to us here at home. I've tried to bring some of our experiences to DC and keep our focus on lowering the cost of healthcare, making it easier for folks to get ahead, to invest in our infrastructure because we are growing so quickly. We still have a lot of work to do, and I hope that I can keep doing that work on behalf of the people of North Texas.
And so what is your message as far as your continued priorities if you are reelected?
Yeah, well, we still have so much work to do to make sure that we're ready to deal with the growth that's coming to North Texas. And I am on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've got to invest in our infrastructure because we have so many folks coming here and that growth is not going to go anywhere. We still have the highest uninsured rate in the country and we have to lower the cost of healthcare, particularly in prescription drugs, and I've been a leader on that and trying to work on that. And I want to make it easier for families to get ahead. You know, my wife and I had a child a month into my time in Congress, and I know some of the expenses that come along with that. You know, at the State of the Union, the President called out a bill that I co-sponsored and introduced with my Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate to try and make it easier for folks to take care of their kids in the first year of their life. So there's a lot to do, and we're going to keep working on that.
Let's talk about that bill for a second. So give me the highlights of the bill, and you mentioned the Senate.
Yes.
And so who were you working with in the Senate on that, and what's the likelihood that you're going to be able to pass this, especially now that the President mentioned it during the State of the Union?
Absolutely. Well, it's a bipartisan, bicameral bill, and that's important because, as you have probably seen, passing in one house is not going to be enough to get it to the President's desk, and obviously with the President calling it out, I think it has a good chance of being signed into law should it get through Congress. And what we try to do is put together just a pretty modest bill to give folks some flexibility in the first year of their life with the child income tax credit, to move that tax money forward, give them more flexibility to take up to $5,000 in the first year of their child's life to try and use that extra money to deal with the costs that are expected and unexpected that come up. And it's something that's a step for me towards where I want to get, which is paid family leave for everyone. You know, I took a leave when my son was born to spend 2 weeks with him and helping my wife also recover and all of that. But every American should be able to spend time with their children, whether they are adopting them or whether they have a child or whether they have something come up in the family, a loved one gets sick, just so that they can be also more productive as workers, because we've seen that when workers have that time with their families, they'll do better at work too.
You've met with businesses as part of being in Congress just here in North Texas. Have you discussed that with them as far as paid family leave? That does put some pressure on businesses where they still have to pay, and yet they don't have the employee there.
Well, there are creative ways around this, and the employees are going to miss the time one way or the other. That's just the way that it works. Sometimes you do it in the form of sick days or something like that, but they're going to have things come up in life. Life happens, and we can't separate always work from life as cleanly as we would like to, whether it's having a child or having a parent get sick. Sometimes you have to spend some time with your family, and I think the businesses that I've spoken with who already have many of these policies in place in their own companies say that their employees are better employees because they've been given that time with their family. They come back more motivated to work, they appreciate their employer. I don't think that we will see a big dip in productivity if we give folks a chance to take care of their families.
Would there be some kind of exemption for very small businesses?
Well, we'll have to see, and I'm open to all kinds of, amendments and changes, and what I am really looking for is a bipartisan package that we can get together on and make sure that we push this forward with industry involved, with business involved, and with workers involved to make sure that everybody's at the table. And that's what our bill is that we introduced around the child income tax credit. It's a first step towards getting there. It's Republicans and Democrats coming together and saying, yes, it's important when you have a child where you have a big life change. We want to find ways to make that easier for you.
You mentioned infrastructure, and I remember you had mentioned this during your campaign as well. So what have you been able to do? How have you been able to contribute up on Capitol Hill to get the ball rolling on this? This was also an issue that the President had mentioned too.
Yeah, well, we have helped to get over $60 million for DART, for platform extensions, for the light rail, which is going to be extremely important. The light rail is going to continue to grow, and I think that's a great thing for us. And we have some other exciting projects coming up with DART, like D2, which we can talk about. But I've been leading on the high-speed train between Dallas and Houston in particular. I led a bipartisan letter to the Secretary of Transportation saying we want to get this project done in Texas because it's a really exciting project. Connecting Dallas and Houston by a 90-minute train is enormous potential for our economy. We're talking about the fourth and fifth largest metropolitan areas in the country. You know, you could live in Dallas and work in Houston because nobody really wants to live in Houston, but you could make that trip. And I've made that drive quite a few times. And 90% of the trips between Dallas and Houston are by car. And if we're going to take vehicles off the road, we're going to have to provide other options for folks to get around. And this would do that.
Now, that letter, was that really just a letter to the Department of Transportation to get the ball rolling on approving the route, the environmental impact?
Yes.
Because that's not something, there's no funding really attached to that, right? Because the company trying to get this together doesn't want government funding.
Yeah, it's a privately funded venture, which is fine. There are a couple of approvals that are resting with the Department of Transportation, and that's what we were saying, that we want to see that happen because I do think that the project has a lot of potential. And I really think that once we have high-speed rail in Texas, that we will want more of it. I think you'll see Dallas and Austin connected by high-speed rail, Austin and San Antonio. I think you'll see all of our major population centers have this option because we are a state that's uniquely positioned for this. There's about a 3-foot elevation drop between Dallas and Houston. You don't see that across the country. We don't have some of the natural barriers in the way, and we have these enormous distances involved. And we have a driving culture with a lot of folks on the road. So if you add a lot more people to the road, the same roads that are there, you're going to have more congestion, more people on it. How do we find a way out of that? Well, we're going to have to diversify the options that Texans have.
So what are your proudest accomplishments, would you say, so far?
Yeah, well, on day one, I introduced a resolution to defend the Affordable Care Act in court. And right now, we are defending it against the Trump administration that's trying to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act. And that's going to be in front of the Supreme Court, and that decision will be reached soon. And that was my resolution to defend it. But the project that I think is most exciting for us locally here is our Garland VA, a health center. As you probably know, Baylor Scott & White has a hospital there that they are no longer using. They want to donate that to the VA. I am on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I've been working extremely hard. This is my top priority to make sure we make this transfer happen. The numbers involved here are really staggering. We're talking about 184,000 veterans who will have access to a more convenient location for them, 5,000 jobs for the city of Garland and the people in the area, and the cost of building a similar facility would be $800 million to $1 billion, whereas the cost of retrofitting this hospital is going to cost the taxpayer less than $20 million. So the numbers are staggering. Everybody is in favor of it. We've put together a bipartisan coalition here in North Texas, and I want to thank my colleagues, Ron Wright in particular, for leading on that and helping me with this. And if we do it, it'll be the right thing for our veterans and for our area.
Are there any obstacles?
There always are, and we're working through those, but we're 99% of the way there, and I'm very hopeful that in the near future we will have a resolution to this. And this has been my top priority. We've spent a lot of hours on the phone with both Baylor Scott & White, with the VA, with every stakeholder involved to try and make sure this happens.
What are the obstacles? I mean, is the administration balking, or is,
Yeah. Well, this is a novel idea. It's the first time it's ever happened. We've never had a hospital donated to the VA in this way. And so there are some legal obstacles that we have to get over in terms of the way that's done. There are also tenants who are currently renting space there, and we have to deal with their tenancy and what the government can accept in terms of taking on a tenant and all of that. So it's mostly legal quibbles that we're working through, but I think we'll be able to get through them.
Let me ask you about impeachment. It's over. And so I'm wondering, how concerned are you the Republicans are going to come after you for your vote to impeach the president?
Well, I did my duty, and I didn't do it with regard to what I thought the political outcome would be. I did what I thought was best for the country and consistent with our Constitution and the values that I grew up with here in North Texas. And I felt very similarly to Mitt Romney in the way he described his vote. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. It wasn't something that I was happy about, but I felt like it was part of the oath that I took that I had to uphold. And I have not let it distract me from the work that I've been doing. A week before the impeachment vote. I was at the White House fighting for family leave and our bill, and talking about our bill that we've introduced on a bipartisan basis, and I'm still working on those things. But this was something that came before us that we could not ignore. It was about the next election and undermining the next election. It was clear that a serious breach of power and abuse of power happened here to try and smear a domestic political opponent. We can't allow that in this country. We don't want to become a country like that, where the president uses all the tools at their disposal to try and go after their opponents and to try and make sure they get reelected. That's not who we are.
How concerned are you that the Republicans are going to beat you up over it, though?
Well, I think people are going to have to just judge me based on the entire scope of the work that I've been doing. And I don't think that impeachment is going to be the top issue in the next election. I think it'll be the things that people care about and think about when they're sitting at their kitchen table at night, which is, what are we going to do if grandma gets sick? How are we going to replace that car that needs to be replaced? Is our kid going to a good enough school? I'm working on all those things, and I think that's what people are going to see, and I hope that that resonates.
One other thing about that, there are some Democrats who say, the president should be impeached again, and the investigations are continuing. Where are you on that? Should this be an ongoing process?
Listen, impeachment has happened. We're not going to go down that road again. But it's also clear that we can't allow, just because that's happened, our constitutional role of oversight to go away. As the Congress, we appropriate money to the administration that they then execute, and they're supposed to also execute the laws, and then we oversee what they're doing. That's what we mean by congressional oversight, to make sure that your tax dollars are being spent on the things that you say they're going to be spent on and that we tell you they're going to be spent on. We have to continue to do that. That is part of our duty just as much as anything else.
I went back to look over your voting record, and I only found one instance in where you didn't vote with the Democratic majority, and that was recently, I think, H.R. 5377, Restoring Tax Fairness for States and Localities. This was about the property tax exemption, boosting that to $20,000, but then also raising the tax rate, the highest tax rate. You voted against that. Why is that?
Well, we don't have state income tax here in Texas, so it really wasn't our issue. This is an issue for the states that were affected by the elimination of the SALT tax, the state and local income tax elimination, as part of the tax reform that happened before I got to Congress. And I still think that we have to revisit that tax bill. It gave way too much to the wealthiest folks in our economy. It was not a middle class tax cut, it was a tax cut for the very wealthiest, the folks who were doing the very best in this economy. And we have seen that it has added nearly $2 trillion to the deficit, and that is a huge problem for us. I just thought that this piecemeal approach to it isn't the way to go about doing it. So I want to see a more comprehensive look and adjustment of that tax bill. We have to make some tough decisions on our spending as well, but I thought that wasn't the appropriate way to go about doing it.
Republicans may criticize you, saying, well, you only voted once against the Democrats, the Democratic majority. What do you say to that?
Well, we're in the majority, and only things that come to the floor to be voted on when they know that folks like me, moderates, are going to vote for it. And that's just the way it is. If there are bills that are out there that get introduced every single day that won't get a vote because people like me aren't going to vote for them. So there's not a whole lot of chance to say, well, I'm going to break here, I'm going to break there, because I've already been consulted. We're already part of the consideration of whatever bill gets to the House floor. But there are things that have happened that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for people like me in the Congress, like USMCA. I was a big leader on the trade agreement. We're the #1 trade state in the country here in Texas. We're the #1 trade state with Mexico. We're #2 with Canada. And so anything dealing with US-Mexico, Canada trading is going to affect us more than any other state. And so I led a letter to the speaker saying that this is very important for Texas. I'm in leadership as freshman class co-president, and I was in our meetings constantly pressing for USMCA. And I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that it would not have happened without folks like me saying this is really important.
Well, Speaker Pelosi, as you know, came under heavy criticism for the delay. It took a long time to get this through the House. What did you make of that? I mean, was some of that justified criticism?
Yeah. Well, I think that any trade agreement is going to last for a long time, and so it's normal that there's going to be a lot of back and forth around it. And the version that came to us was significantly different than the version that we sent back. We made a number of adjustments that are better for workers, better for the environment. We now have ways to verify some of the things that are actually in this agreement. Under NAFTA, we have no way to verify that working conditions are being upheld in Mexico, that they're not being artificially kept low and costs being kept low so that we lose jobs there. As much as I believe in trade for Texas, I don't want to see any American jobs being shipped off to Mexico, and we were focused on that. And there was also an aspect around prescription drugs and trying to make sure that we weren't locked into preventing lowering some of the costs, particularly around biologic drugs that are expensive to develop, but that also are really huge breakthroughs. So we did some important work in improving the USMCA. But I was in constant contact with the trade rep, Bob Lighthizer. He and I talked many, many times as part of my efforts to make sure we got this done. I made sure he knew what our priorities were, and we did get it done over time.
Just a couple more quick issues, and that was, I say quick, but guns. Where are you on, adding restrictions? Obviously, there's a lot of disagreement over this. This is a very divisive issue. So where are you on this, on what do you think can be done, if anything?
Yeah. Well, we've had some horrible tragedies here in Texas. We had 2 mass shootings, both in El Paso, and we know that we have to do something about gun violence in this country. We recently had 2 young women who were killed, and their young son who was also shot by a boyfriend who had already abused her earlier. And so we know that we have to close some of these loopholes. And so I have voted for and supported what I think should be common sense ways to reduce gun violence. These passed with bipartisan votes. One was our background check bill, just to extend background checks to the sale of all guns. We already see it if you go to a gun store. This is just extending it to gun shows, to online sales. It's not something that's trying to fundamentally change anything dealing with your right to possess and bear arms. It's about making sure that if you do have a weapon, that you have gone through a background check to get that firearm.
Does that include private sales?
Well, it does include some aspects of private sales, and then we also had the Violence Against Women Act closing the boyfriend loophole, where if you were convicted of stalking or something like that, that you would not be able to have access to a firearm. Far too many women per month are being killed by an intimate partner. We've seen that here in North Texas recently, and we've seen that across the country. This is just trying to close that loophole as well. These are things that are modest adjustments, they're common sense adjustments, but they will help save lives.
And so what's the status of that bill that you were just discussing?
Yeah, the Violence Against Women Act has been reauthorized by the House, but it has not been taken up in its current form by the Senate. And so unfortunately it has not been reauthorized. They have a separate version that does not include the boyfriend loophole, closing that. And there's, of course, some powerful interests involved here from the gun lobby trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. But we're going to do everything we can to try and make sure that we close those loopholes. I want to make sure that we are raising our children in a country that's safe for them. We have kids right now in schools like Hillcrest High School, where I went to school, who are being involved in active shooter drills. It's not just, it's not duck and cover like it was for our parents during the nuclear era. This is now an active shooter might come into the school. This is what we're going to do. And the mental trauma that some of our young people are going through, and I hear from them all the time. And whenever I speak to young people, one of the top 2 issues that will come up is gun violence and how it's affecting them and how worried they are. I want kids to go to school and be thinking about learning, not about somebody coming into the school with a gun.
And then illegal immigration. What is the status right now of any efforts, bipartisan efforts, and what are you doing to contribute to that? I mean, the question of the dreamers is still out there. So what can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Well, we passed the DREAM Act and the Promise Act in the House, which is to extend some of these programs that have been offered under the Obama administration permanently to our dreamers here and to TPS recipients, temporary protected status recipients from other countries. Those passed the House. I think they did have a bipartisan vote in the House. It has not been taken up by the Senate. And so that's unfortunate. I think it should be taken up. If you look at the economic impact of dreamers in our state, it's huge. And these are folks who grew up here, who consider themselves to be as American as we do, and I think they should be allowed to stay here.
Is there, but aren't they waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on this?
Well, the Supreme Court is ruling on an executive order and ruling
President Obama's executive
on
order.
its constitutionality. And that's not a permanent status. That's not going to give them the certainty that they're looking for. I speak to dreamers all the time. They come to my office. They tell me about the work that they're doing and how they are so concerned that they're not going to be able to continue doing that work. I had a roundtable not long ago with Richardson ISD, talking about the severe limits that we have on bilingual teachers who can speak in both languages and teach in those. A lot of dreamers are filling those roles. They're serving in our military, they're serving in our police forces and our firefighter departments. These are folks who are contributing to our communities, and they should be allowed to stay here.
Final question, that is just looking forward to the general election. Why do you believe that you, a Democrat, can still win this and keep your seat?
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I think I've done a good job for the people of North Texas, and I've kept my focus, as I said, on the issues that I think are most important to us here. This is a district that rejected Donald Trump in 2016. He lost this district in 2016. And of course, I won along with a number of other folks in 2018, running against some of the same ideas that are going to be on the ballot this time around. I can tell you, whoever my opponent is on the Republican side, they're going to be running as part of the party of Donald Trump. And that's not what North Texas wants right now. I think people are looking at this president and looking at this version of the Republican Party and seeing that it doesn't reflect their values. And so that's what's going to be at stake here this November. It's going to be, who are we? What's North Texas going to be about? And are we going to be a country that turns on each other? Or are we going to be a country that is as big and as bold and is as open as we know we can be?
Congressman Allred, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jack.
Really appreciate it.